Hi, Mom.
Mom. All right, we're gonna wait. We're gonna let the people trickle in. The 3 people, they'll trickle in. I'm just gonna check, make sure.
Hey, we had some RSVPs this time. Now that I figured out how the events button works on LinkedIn, that's pretty cool.
Correct.
We've just been blasting it out.
And I just tweeted it. I just retweeted that we're live. Cool. All right, awesome. We're going to kick it off. Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to Unicorn Finders for this week. I think we need to start getting like Halloween editions. Nader, for the record, at the end, we're going to do a lightning round. There's going to be a Halloween theme, so hope you're ready. But for those of you who are watching again, we are the Unicorn Finders. We are trying to find the unicorn in both business, people, relationships. And today, I feel like we have a unicorn. Nader Dabit hails from Mississippi. I've been following Nader for a bit now on Twitter. Again, the power of Twitter. But Nader's done some pretty incredible stuff at Amazon, and obviously very involved in the React community. And so without further ado, Nader, man, if you want to give a quick background to the 2 people who are watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to the discussion. We're talking about some things that really like to talk about. So, and I think a lot of people are interested in this stuff, especially going forward into the future. I think this is going to be really important role for a lot of companies and similar roles. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know where to start. I mean, I'm a senior developer advocate. I work at AWS. Before that, I was a consultant running my own company called React Native Training. That's how I kind of met the team that I'm on. Was doing trainings for Amazon and also a lot of other big tech companies like Microsoft and a lot of banks and stuff like that for building mobile apps with React Native. Teaching awesome. their engineering teams kind of how to do that, and then also doing a little bit of consulting after the initial training was done. Before that, software engineer, a couple of startups here in Mississippi, as well as a couple of traditional like corporate type of tech companies here in Mississippi. Lived here most of my life. I did move to LA when I first got into tech to kind of get my feet wet, I guess, to get some experience before the remote thing was like as big of a deal as it is now. Now I work remotely. All of my clients before working with AWS were, not in Mississippi. So I pretty much have zero business here. I just live here.
Wow. Yeah,
awesome.
I lived in LA for a bit right before I moved to Raleigh, actually. You have to, at least try it. Let's try it every once in a while.
Yeah, it was cool. if I had like $1 million extra at the time, like in the bank, I might have stayed.
Yeah,
I don't blame you. So, Nader, let's go ahead and dive into the first topic that you're passionate about. Is cross-platform mobile development. And so, and I know Jake talked about this, off air before we logged on, but I'm interested. So, kind of dive in a little bit more specific, a little more granular on kind of what you do specifically from a cross-platform. Where is your specialty? And then Jake obviously asked some questions that you were asking earlier off air as well.
Okay, yeah. So I think the reason that I became super interested in cross-platform development is really the thing that has interested me the most since I became a programmer and a developer, are just any of the better abstractions or the more efficient abstractions that allow you to kind of take the skill set that you have or learn a very small additional set of skills and be able to accomplish a lot. And basically, React Native fell into that. So basically, for me, I was a JavaScript developer already. I was already doing stuff with, at the time, jQuery Mobile and Ionic and these older technologies, Cordova. And I was wanting to build mobile apps, but I didn't want to kind of take away my specialty, which was JavaScript at the time, and that's the thing that I felt the most comfortable with. So if you want to become an iOS developer and you want to become an expert there, you probably have to kind of spend years, becoming an expert. So React Native kind of brought to the table for developers like me and a lot of other developers, I think, the ability to build higher quality mobile apps, almost native, using our existing skill set. So it's kind of like one of those things that you can kind of just learn a little extra and become, a lot more valuable to a team or do a lot more. So anything that falls into that category in cross-platform, and I think that there's maybe really only one other competitor, in my opinion, that's a similar level or similar bar. Flutter. So Flutter is kind of another one that's kind of competing with React Native. I think both of those are just, breakout technologies that we're going to see really transform the way that people are building mobile apps, and they already have.
Flutter has really jumped up in the last year, especially. And by the way, there's no E in Flutter, y'all, if you're trying to get on the Google about that. But yeah, that's
all the recruiters right now are like, oh no, I misspelled it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, it's interesting. You're like, yeah, we've been talking to some of our clients about, kind of choosing which way to go. I still think that as of right now, if you're going to think about building the team holistically, React Native might be a little bit stronger because you can find some talent that already knows how to work with it. Flutter being a little bit newer. But if you have that luxury to be able to train or work with people, great engineers, then I don't know, why not? Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Nader. I've always wanted to know this, and this is, and I'm glad we have you, so I can ask. How much of a learning curve is React Native if you already have React, but you don't have React Native?
So I guess the answer is it depends. Like if you're building an app that is supported completely by the React Native APIs and the ones that are available in the community that don't require any native development, I would say the learning curve is small to like medium, and I would probably right in that range, I would say. So if you're building like a Hello World app, or if you want to build like a pretty basic app with authentication and maybe listing and creating and updating and deleting, then I would say it's low. But if you start getting into some of the more mobile specific UI and UX that you might expect out of a mobile app, then you might start getting into the intermediate learning curve. And then if you need to actually write a bridge that accesses some native functionality that isn't available yet, then that would be kind of expert, I would say. So it kind of just depends. I would say though, for you to get started, it's a very low learning curve.
That's awesome.
We're it's interesting, right? Just talking about writing that bridge there, because that really was the slow transition for people who haven't done a ton of research, or maybe just like, let's just kind of stick with what we know, things like that. We push React Native really hard if you're able to, at all costs, because Vaco started as a recruiting firm, and then we added engineering and services, about 2 years ago, which is the division I lead. And then at that point, it's like, well, we kind of have that we know what it takes to find that talent afterwards. So if we're going to be servicing you and building something, our recommendation is if you get to pick and you can use it, then pick something that you can hire people later and train them in and cross-train them, versus, especially in our market, it's very difficult to find true native development like with iOS and Objective-C, or with Kotlin and Android SDK or anything like that. Where do you think that line really is, to where it's like, oh crap, well, you know what, React Native can't quite cut it on this. We should have built this, or we need to build this in true native applications.
I think that line is moving closer and closer towards React Native, in the sense that I would say that more and more types of apps can be built using React Native or Flutter. When I was doing, training, actually, like pretty much every team that I was working with was a native team. Very rarely was I brought into a JavaScript web team and they wanted to kind of start building mobile apps. Most of the time, these big companies were having serious issues hiring native developers, or they were having serious issues scaling their code base or keeping it up to feature parity. And they would send me in a room full of Android and iOS developers, and I would be teaching these people how to build mobile apps with React Native, because the sheer flexibility and also the code reuse and all that stuff that you get out of React Native. And most of these apps that they were building were like, really enterprise facing apps, like the American Express app, or these apps that you would expect a billion-dollar company for them to be spending, the most money and having the highest quality. Well, they're using React Native. So to me, if those types of companies are using React Native, then it's good enough for pretty much almost any use case, at least for the discussion to be open about using it. Now, there are certain circumstances where I would probably recommend native. For instance, if you're building like a game that relies heavily on some native API, that isn't really exposed.
Or something.
Yeah, anything with like heavy animations, maybe like a game. things that might just need a ton of extra work on the native side, almost making it a native app anyway. You might as well just write it in native, things like that, things that don't port over well to cross platform. So if you have a certain API that is a lot different between iOS and Android, you have to write a lot of native code anyway. Like, I would say the more native code that you have to write, the less of a good fit, in my opinion, it is for React Native.
Yeah, because we've seen some, most of the time I feel like people are trying to build something that very simple, that it's going to hold video, some sort of streaming, it's going to have some sort of chat, it's going to have some secure login opportunity, and it's mostly going to be a login with Facebook, a login with Gmail, or a login now with Apple ID, which you can do all that easily with that authentication. And then maybe some frequently asked questions, and if anything, you're going to have a store on top. Like, all of those are super simple when it comes to building from what's actually required of the device itself and building out those applications. And it's still hard sometimes to get people to do this. Whoa, I don't know if I want to experiment or anything, but you can see the communities. It's not a new technology anymore per se. It's very, very stable, very robust. It's used in lots and lots of environments. What do you think? Did you ever bump into any of those? You mentioned Cordova earlier, and you've heard companies that are trying to edge their way into, oh crap, we didn't think about mobile in the first place, that are trying to edge their way into some of this PhoneGap type, Cordova, Xamarin type thing. Have you done any sort of side-by-side or rebuilds against a React Native and a PhoneGap type technology? And what does that look like? That's a good question.
Yeah, I did work with one company that was porting over a pretty sophisticated Cordova app into React Native. And the only issue that we ran into was the sheer amount of code debt that they already had, and this technical debt they already had, and trying to dig out that functionality and rewrite it in React Native. But the actual performance was just a massive improvement. I think that people that maybe are not too familiar with the nuances between these different platforms and the way that they actually work might be kind of fooled into thinking oh, I can just use a web view, which is like Cordova, and get away with it. And you might be able to do that for some very lightweight or basic types of apps. But as your app becomes more and more complex, as you add more and more functionality, and maybe your user base grows, and you want to continue to have a good user experience and a good performance, then that's when React Native especially starts to shine, because you'll just not really know whether or not it's native or not a lot of the times, most of the time. It's really hard for me to tell whether an app is React Native or it's native, but it's almost certain that I can tell you if it's a Cordova web view. So I think that's the big difference.
That lag alone.
We got one question too on YouTube. It says thoughts on Ionic and kind of what you've seen, Nader, kind of in the market compared to React Native.
So Ionic is really great because it's probably, if you're going to build something with Cordova, I would definitely recommend Ionic, and especially now that they support Vue and React as well as Angular. I think it's basically a one level higher of abstraction than React Native, as far as if you want to write React and build a mobile app, that's where I would go. I think at the end of the day, Ionic is just a really, really high quality framework, and I would definitely recommend it, but it's definitely also not React Native. So you just have to understand the trade-offs between the two. You might have a little bit easier experience, getting started with something like Ionic than you might with React Native if you're a web developer. But if you spend a little extra time learning the React Native APIs, it shouldn't be that big of a difference.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good option if you're looking if you're looking to build and you don't want to use React Native, but you do want to use React, that's definitely what I would recommend.
I think it's some great work with the client, and that even with something along the line that had to be really heavily regulated, and we used Angular and Ionic framework for that, and that worked really well especially for we're able to build out. It was a repeat application across different therapeutic areas for the pharmaceutical company. So every single one had to have basically the same application, and you were but different beginning in that. And they didn't want to throw out some of the stuff they'd already done in Angular, so it was an interesting term. What do you think about Xamarin? I know it's a little bit older now, but for some reason it's popping up.
So Xamarin?
Yeah.
I don't really have a ton of experience with Xamarin. So the Microsoft / .NET community I see still talking about and using Xamarin. I feel like it's still seems to be pretty well maintained and all of that. But the fact that React Native is now being used in Microsoft so heavily kind of makes me assume that that they're also maybe thinking React Native is a better option. And if that's the case, you would probably tend to weigh more heavily like that. You would probably choose React Native for longer term projects in the future, because if they have a platform that they've built and they own themselves and they're still choosing React Native for a lot of their newer apps and their more important apps, then you would take that into consideration for sure.
Yeah, so and they have a history of sunsetting technologies too. They're like, actually, we made a mistake, and then throw it out and stop supporting it after a certain number of years too.
Yeah, and so Nader, I'm going to ask you this. So last question on the cross-platform, then we'll move into kind of the next area topic for the developer advocate DevRel kind of questions. But so if I'm a CIO, CTO listening to this episode, watching this episode later, what would you say like the 2 or 3 key things that a decision maker within an IT organization needs to think about with going either React Native specifically or cross-platform in general? I know we talked about it earlier about why you would use native versus, but I just kind of wanted to streamline it again. Like, what are some key things that you need to evaluate within your organization?
So the first thing I would look at would be the feature set of the app that we're building. Like try to really lay out everything that you're going to need for like a V1 or even slightly beyond that, and really deep dive into the implementation. This probably wouldn't take that long, maybe a day or two, to kind of go through each thing and try to understand how well it's supported in the framework. And by the end of that process, you should have a really solid understanding of what is supported by React Native, what isn't, and how much extra work you'll have to do to kind of get that functionality. And if you can go through that process and at the end of that, come away with the fact that React Native probably is a good choice, then I would probably 100% go all in on React Native. There's the other thing you might consider is like, what does your current engineering team look like? Are you going to have to hire a lot of new people for this? Are you going to have to fire people and hire other people, or do you have people that can already jump and work on this already? If you have like a really native, I would say if your team is already really native centric, like if you have a really, really strong iOS developers and really strong Android developers already, then it's kind of a more of a consideration whether or not you want to go with React Native, because a lot of times those developers are really skeptical of React Native and they might feel like they don't want to do this. But what I've found is that native developers are actually the best React Native developers, because the JavaScript stuff and getting that stuff done isn't the biggest learning curve. The biggest learning curve is when you have to start writing the native code. And since they're already native developers, they seem to really be able to be badass on React Native. So you end up having these like 10x React Native developers if they're native developers versus JavaScript developers who have to, they do really great for most of the work, but when you do need to get into native code, it's really tough for them.
I love that.
Yeah. Especially around shipping it and some of that compliance or the regulation stuff, as those change so frequently also, depending on if you're in Google Play or Apple Store or whatever. Yeah.
So, all right. Next topic is a topic that I know a lot of people are interested in. And that is the DevRel, developer advocate side of things. Right. So I think a lot of people want that role, right? They see Nader on Twitter and he's tweeting about all the things and growing a following. And then we'll get a little bit of branding too, because Nader has developed quite a following, mainly about
Taylor wants that role. It's Taylor.
Yeah, I do want that. Yeah, exactly. So Nader, so let me ask you this, man. So talk to me about your career journey from going from, hey, listen, like a typical developer. How did you get this new role? And then talk to me about some nuances, because I think any software developer that's watching this is like, man, Nader, I want to be a DevRel. How do I get there? Kind of walk me through that entire journey.
So there's a couple of questions there. One is kind of how to get into DevRel, and then like how I got into it. So for me, it kind of goes back to 2000, I guess 16ish. and I was using React Native actually. So it kind of involves React Native. I was using React Native at this company in Mississippi, a startup, and we had adopted it in 2015, and that was when it came out. So we were like really early adopters. We adopted it a few months after it was released. We actually released an app a few months after that, and it was actually me on the front end. So I built the app myself, and of course we had a back end team that supported me there. So like in building that app, in launching that early, I learned a lot about React Native at the early stages, and therefore I was on Stack Overflow trying to help a lot of people. So over the course of like the year, I probably answered 1,000 questions or a few hundred questions. I don't know. But during that experience on Stack Overflow, I kind of like was enjoying it. So I would see a new question come up. I would go and try to solve it if I didn't know it already, and then I would learn something, and it kind of helped me build my knowledge and become a better developer. But also I ended up becoming like the number one person on Stack Overflow for React Native in the world. And then I had a bunch of people start reaching out to me for consulting and book writing opportunities. So
sick brag.
Well, it's just the way that it kind of happened, actually. And it's also like something I would recommend other people do. If there's a new technology and you go on Stack Overflow, you have the opportunity to kind of step in and become like ranked, and then you get opportunities that come in through that. Whereas if you try to do that with JavaScript, like there's no way that's going to happen, because people have answered all these low-hanging fruit like 10 years ago. And also there's a lot more competition. But if you get in on a new technology, it's a lot easier to kind of do that. But so
who's ranking up there with Flutter right now on Stack Overflow?
Yeah, Flutter might be a good. That's a good call out. But I got offered to write a book a couple of times from these different publishers. So I went with one of them, and I wrote React Native in Action. And then the combination of that book and also Stack Overflow ended up getting me a lot of people reaching out to me for consulting while I was working my full-time job. And what I noticed was training was like a really lucrative thing, because the consulting opportunities would be in the range of like, whatever, hundreds of X number of dollars an hour. But the training were like in the tens of thousands per contract. So I was like, and then those only took a couple of days. And this was before COVID, when you can actually travel. So I landed a couple of really great contracts, like training. And one of those training and I quit my job and did that full time. And one of the contracts was with Amazon. It was the biggest contract that I ever had landed. And while I was doing that, I also decided to contribute to one of the open source projects that AWS had released, called Amplify. And they were building the React Native SDK. So that's kind of what I always talk about on Twitter. And the way that I got the job was I had helped them by merging a pretty big PR into one of their SDK example projects. And then when I was in Seattle doing a training, someone on that team reached out to me to have coffee, and I met with them. And that was kind of what spun off the interview. They were like, "Would you like to come and do this type of stuff like full time?" And I was like, "Yeah." So interviewed and became, I think there was 3 DAs on the team at that point, me and 2 other people that had been there for a while. And that was also when we were launching a new suite of services called Amplify and SDKs. And that's kind of when I came on early on to try to grow that. And it's become pretty successful at this point.
So, all right. Go ahead, Jake.
I got questions.
Go ahead.
So two things on that. One, it's awesome just to see how just taking action and doing things led to a new role, new career, just being noticed. And it's cool that you were able to be recognized for the work that you put in and the time that you put into pouring it back into the community, able to turn it into consulting a job. That's just awesome. I love hearing that kind of story, because I just feel like it can be, anyone can do it, in a sense that you have to start doing it to know if you're that anyone. Right. So that's awesome. Kudos. And I love the shout out too about, hey, jump on a new technology and start doing stuff on Stack Overflow. Now that you're in that seat, is it something that you would recommend, or what do you think that would make a good version of you if people were like, man, I really feel like I'd be good at these conference circuits or training or coaching or speaking? What is kind of like the it factor that you think people should identify themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. You have to really enjoy like helping and teaching other people. And I think that's something that when I first came back from LA, when I moved back to Mississippi, I went from LA, like meetups and all these community things happening, to Mississippi. There was nothing happening. And I immediately was like, okay, we have to get something going here. So I created a couple of meetups. I actually created a coding school that ended up being free because we could never find anyone to pay. And just getting people from the community to donate their time and money, and me doing that as well. And I just enjoyed teaching people because it was like really helped me. These people that had taught me and given me these opportunities to become successful in my career, kind of wanted to give back, but I also really enjoyed it. So it was kind of like, if you enjoy teaching and you enjoy helping other people, that's to me one of the key factors. The other is just being able to learn quickly. It'll be very stressful in this position if you're kind of trying to do all these things, and you start realizing that you have to, if you want to answer questions and interact with people, you have to kind of have a fundamental amount of knowledge about this stuff. And it becomes extremely stressful if you're put in a situation where you're expected to answer questions and you don't know any of the answers. And that's happened to me a few times for sure. And the way that I try to avoid those situations is by diving into things early on and trying to understand them really early on. And then that way, when the people come with those questions, I kind of at least have the answer, or I can point them to the answer, or I can point them to the people that have the answer. So I would say, enjoying teaching, enjoying helping people, learning quickly, being able, I guess, to feel comfortable presenting and being public and open about the things that are happening that you're doing. It's kind of really uncomfortable at first. For me, it was, at least, to go on Twitter and talk about the way I was feeling or the way I was thinking, or showing even code that I'd written. That was really hard for me, showing the code I'd written, because I was really scared that someone was going to come online and tell me that I had done something wrong and criticize me. And it does happen. It still happens. It literally happened yesterday. Someone points out like Twitter a mistake. Exactly. And it's the way that you respond to those situations. So now I'm like looking for that feedback, whereas before I was scared of that feedback. And I think that helps as well. So, I mean, all of that stuff helps, but different people in DevRel have different approaches. Like some people are better at doing, certain things. So I would say that it's a fun job. And if you're interested in it, you can probably make it work. You just have to kind of learn what works best for you and find a good fit, and just be really public about sharing, the things that you're working on. And that way you can start becoming comfortable with what the job really entails, which is kind of all about interacting with people.
That vulnerability is huge. It's interesting. You're putting that human aspect to a technology. It's really what it is. You personify it, have that face behind it, so people can have that connection and know that it's okay to try this and fail and that. And it takes a special kind of security, I guess, to really just put yourself out there in that sense. But obviously, it pays off. We have some quick questions in the chat.
Yeah, we do have some questions. So the first question. So going back technical real quick. This is from Nikki. I'd love to hear your thoughts on writing React Native in action.
Okay, yeah. React Native in Action was the first book I'd written, and it was with Manning Publications, and it was actually extremely, extremely tough. It was probably one of the hardest things I had done in my career at that point, because I'd never written anything before, like a book. At least I'd written blog posts, but also React Native at the time was changing so quickly that we would finish like a few chapters, and then I would have to go back and completely rewrite those chapters. Yeah. So that was kind of stressful. And then I was holding down a full-time job and also doing consulting and on the side, and also trying to spend time with my family. So it was a little stressful, and it took a long time because we kept having to go and rewrite things. But what I learned during that process was that if you set some type of goal and try to not, instead of attacking the entire goal, like immediately trying to kind of set aside time every day and slowly chip away at it, then you can pretty much accomplish anything that you really put your mind to. And that was kind of the book. I would spend like an hour every day working on it, maybe 2 hours. And like before you know it, you're kind of finished with it, right? So like but you just have to work on it every day. You're not going to get it all done immediately. You have to have a little bit of that postponement of satisfaction, or whatever you call that. But it was a really great experience. And I've had, it's not the money that I made off the book, it's the opportunities that came out of it. So if you're thinking about writing a book, there's two types of ways that you can go. You can go with a publisher like Manning, or you can self-publish. With Manning or O'Reilly, you're going to make less money on the book itself, but you might use that, use their trust to kind of build a brand for yourself. Because if O'Reilly or Manning lets you write for them, that means they vetted you and you know what you're talking about. If they actually put the book out there, right? If you publish yourself, you have to kind of somehow convey that trust in one way or another. Now, you might already have that trust, but if you're just starting off, I think a good way to kind of build that type of notoriety, or whatever you would call that, not notoriety, but trust, would be to kind of go with the publisher.
I love that. I love that. Also, Danny Thompson, shout out Nader.
Shout out.
Phenomenal human being.
I'm a huge fan of Danny Thompson.
Danny Thompson is a Unicorn Finders alumni.
Yeah,
really?
We had him on a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
We had him on a couple weeks ago. Next question. Nader, your book is now in my cart. This is why we do this podcast. There we go. Nader, you can go ahead and send us some royalties. Any other great React Native resources you would recommend?
So this is going to sound like really like whenever I talk to people about learning React Native, the one thing I always recommend, and this is kind of going to be a huge help for a lot of people that I've talked to after I recommended this, is just actually creating a new React Native app, go into the docs and creating and implementing every single API and every single component in the docs.
Wow. And
just doing that alone, you're going to learn a lot. And then, and each one of those steps should be documented well enough to where you don't really have to go looking for external resources. Like you might run into a bug in their docs or whatever and need to Google it. But I would say 99% of that stuff you should be able to get done. And just by going through that exercise, you're going to have a really, really solid understanding of how to build a mobile app, because you're going to realize, oh, you can use this API to listen to this event, or you can use this piece of UI component to do this. And I've seen this on my iOS app. I just didn't know that it was an actual thing. Like all of those things will start to click. And by the end of it, by going through each API and each component in the React Native docs, at the end of it, you'll come away with a good understanding of kind of how to build an app, in my opinion.
I love that.
And it's free.
I love that. So this is actually from our Unicorn Finders intern, Cha. She's asking any Udemy courses that you would suggest.
And so there's so many, I'm guessing this is about React Native, but there's so many Udemy courses that are good at this point. I usually have like a mechanism I just use to find good ones, just by looking for something that's extremely recently updated and also has a good number of average star rating. I think those two things you can't go wrong. And a lot of times you'll see a course that actually resonates better with you than another. So I would say just filter by those metrics and find one that looks good to you. And it's probably going to be a safe bet.
I love that. Awesome. Also, Heart, AWS Amplify. So that's pretty cool stuff. Sweet. So, Nader, we need to do a follow-up, because I want to tap into the personal brand stuff that you've done. So we'll just have to have a follow-up video session on that. So the last part of our podcast, we do with every guest, we do a lightning round, 5 questions. I keep track of the points. I judge you in my head, but I don't say it out loud. So we're going to go right into it. First thing that pops into your brain when I ask these questions. First question that is not Halloween themed. It's just kind of an ongoing inside joke between me, Jake, and Dan, who's not with us today. He's still alive. He just can't be with us today. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Oh.
Thank you. All right. Now the rest of the questions are very Halloween themed. Your favorite Halloween candy? If you say candy corn, I will not air this episode.
Snickers is just all my all-time favorite everything, and I eat it during Halloween.
All right, I hear you. I actually bought a whole bag of. I mean, no one asked me this question. I'm just telling you. Like the crackle, like the Hershey's, where it's like dark chocolate crackle and like a bunch of other sort of things. I bought a whole bag of them for myself yesterday at the grocery store. I had a moment of weakness.
Did you already go
nice.
through?
No, I had like 10 last night though. All right, next question. What is the best Halloween costume you've ever dressed up as? Or, you specifically.
Well, definitely the Transformers. I bought like a $500 Transformers Halloween costume a few years ago because I wanted to kind of
not.
I wanted
No,
to hang
that's
out with
awesome.
my son who was also dressed up as a Transformer, and like
Oh,
it was
that's
one of those
awesome.
costumes where everyone like that you see takes a picture with you and all that stuff. It was cool. It was fun. It was. I would never probably do that again unless I become like a millionaire or something. But it was a nice investment for
That is
trying
so cool.
trying it once.
How many kiddos do you have?
I have 2.
Dude, no,
That's awesome.
not trying to one up you because I don't recommend it. but
Jake's
I have
got
3.
9.
It's 3.
And I finally have one. I have a 9-week-old. So
Oh, nice! Congrats.
Yeah. All right. Next
Awesome.
question is an oxymoron. Favorite scary movie or the movie that has scared you the most? I don't know if I'm not a scary movie fan, so it would be like the scariest movie. So
This isn't even that scary of a movie probably now, but when I was 4 or 5 years old or whenever, I was just really young. My babysitter let me watch The Terminator, and I had nightmares for like 20 years after that. And now it's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, so that's the scariest movie that I've ever
Overcome your
seen,
fear.
just because
Good
it had
job.
a bad effect on me for my childhood.
Well, yeah, when I was like 4 or 5, I was scared of Ursula and Little Mermaid. At that point, I was
Exactly,
Listen,
that's what I was
hard
used to.
pass. Yeah.
listen, for me, I'd say I think The Others was the first scary movie with Nicole Kidman. That was kind of creepy, but the scariest one was The Strangers.
I don't think
still
I've
have
seen
nightmares.
those.
You
I
don't
haven't
need to
seen
see
Strangers.
Social Dilemma. That was pretty
it.
pretty scary.
Nerd. All right, next question. So, if you follow Nader, and how can people find you on Twitter?
Dabit3, DABIT 3.
There we go. I'll put that in the notes. I'll put that in podcast notes. But I follow you, and I've noticed your documentation of Indian cuisine.
Yes.
Now, I'm a big Indian cuisine guy. Let me ask you this. What is your favorite Indian dish? Like go to, not that you even make, just like you go out to India and like, you're like, ooh, I have to have this Indian dish.
Okay, well, definitely it's this tandoori lobster in Goa, India. And it's probably the best thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. No, it is the best thing I've ever eaten in my entire life.
That sounds
and
amazing.
They basically bring out a lobster tail that's like this big, and it's like tandoori style baked, and it's probably like $20 or something.
I have goosebumps. I have goosebumps. I literally have goosebumps. You talking about tandoori lobster?
I can't stop thinking about it. I mean, I ate it, and well, I mean, there's a bunch of these little shacks kind of on the beach there, and you just walk up, and it's like it's completely unexpected. I didn't expect it to be that amazing, and after I found it, I ate there like every day until I left, and now I want to go back, and I can't. Yeah, I can't. I don't think I'll ever be able to like top that. So,
wow, that's awesome.
Interested.
Cool. Well, that was it, Nader. I appreciate you hanging, buddy.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, both of y'all. It was cool talking about this stuff. Let's definitely do this again and talk about branding and all of that stuff.
We should do a joint with you and Danny Thompson and us talking about
let's
branding.
do it. Let's do it.
I think we should. That's how you do
Danny,
it.
We'll shout out to you, buddy.
Yeah. Nader, have a good one, man.
Thanks. Y'all too.
Take care.
Later.